Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I am Sean Butler. Bugsy Malone is just there doing the things that she loves to do with those that she loves to do them with. I hope she loves me. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. I hope you guys are doing all the things that you love to do with those you love to do them with. Do me a favour, guys. Smash the like button like you always do. Your like game is incredible. Incredible. And I really appreciate it. Hit the subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell. Drop some comments. Let me know your thoughts on today's click-worthy content, I hope. People saying that I'm a clickbait. I don't make up the stories, guys. I'm just getting the stories from the various people that may or may not be making them up. I don't know. I'm not an ITK. And then just delivering them to you with my own little slice and spice of variety. Anyway, here's today's topics. It's not a very long one. We've got 3 names for you. All 3 we've heard about before, but this is like a little bit of an update for you. Jonathan David, let's start with him, shall we? We know he is a free transfer, and he's already said goodbye to his Lille teammates, said goodbye to his Lille fans. And as far as all of the kind of content narratives that exist out there, it's been widely received, widely accepted almost, that he's going to Napoli, like the deal is done. But it ain't done, guys. It is not done. And what's really interesting is that Caught Offside, again, not me, Caught Offside, have come out with a story today saying that actually Tottenham and Aston Villa are ahead of Napoli in the queue for Jonathan David, and that when you kind of figure out the logistics of the financials, it doesn't really make any sense to believe that Aston Villa can really add an extra 280, circa 250 to 300 grand a week onto their wage bill, because they're already at 98% wage to revenue turnovers. Of course, their revenue is going to go up this year on next year's numbers because of their phenomenal performances in several cups and, of course, the league. And after them beating us on Friday night, it looks like they're going to be in the Champions League again. So they're getting now to this point where their wage to turnover ratios will come down, not necessarily because they are chopping their wage bill, but because the denominator in the equation, the revenue itself, is going up. And so it won't be 98% for long. Also, they may or may not embark on some deals to sell players like Bailey and or Emi Martinez to Saudi. The scratching of backs continues. But in any event, to me, in the short term at least, you would still think that the 98% wage to revenue turnover ratios are still an issue of some degree. And so the idea of signing a free transfer that comes with it, according to other reports, a £15 million signing fee demand for the player, a £10 million signing fee demand for the agent. I always wonder about that, right? Why does the agent get 10 million quid? Like, what's he done? The player has let his contract run down. Why does the agent get a big payoff? Is it because he's advising on where to go? I don't know. I just feel like he's got his hand in the cookie jar. He wants a slice of the pie. But in terms of the value in which the agent is providing, is it different? Is it materially different when there's a non-club transfer and the player comes out of his contract and is available for free? Does the agent do more work to deserve more slice of the pie? I don't really understand it, to be entirely honest. But there's a lot of things I don't understand. Let me know if you do. But £10 million for him or for them, £15 million for Jonathan David, and then 15 million euros a week, which is about sort of 280, 270, something like that, 260 pound a week, which was the story I said to you before. Like, why don't we go and do that? We can do that. We have more than enough wiggle room on the wages, and it's about time that Tottenham at some point have to get on board this idea that we're going to pay more than 200 grand a week. We paid it for Ndombele. That was a shit show. We were paying it to Harry Kane. We haven't paid it since. Like, there will be a club's new highest earner this summer, in my opinion. I hope so, really hope so. If there isn't, then I'm wondering what's going on. And so I just sit there and think, like, the Jonathan David thing ticks so many boxes. It's also offering the opportunity to be able to work with the agent and the player if Tottenham are cash illiquid at the moment, and be able to say, look, you know, the selling club isn't involved in this, so like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Can we figure out a way where you're still going to get your £25 million between your two parties, but can we do it in a way where we can also go about and do other business that will help Jonathan David reach his goals if he wants to come here, sort of thing. And so I hope that there would be like a kind of everyone pulling in the same direction narrative. So it makes sense. It makes sense for Tottenham. It makes sense for Aston Villa as well, especially if they're going to be selling Bailey, and they probably need to go in a different direction. We don't know what's happening with Marcus Rashford. Are they just going to move that money onto Jonathan David? But yeah, the notion that Napoli, it's all signed and sealed, it isn't, according to reports that I've seen this morning from Caught Offside, and that Tottenham are actually ahead of Villa on the logistics and the kind of the framework of it, and that Napoli is nowhere near as advanced as has been reported elsewhere. Now, I don't know. I'm just bringing you the news, so make of it what you will. But I would love to see him come in. And like I say, guys, when you have this, I've always said that the wage to turnover ratio at 42% is misunderstood, because the reason why it looks like that is because our revenues, although last year they only fell 5%, but the wages certainly did drop, but there was a lot of outgoing players. People were not factoring in that Tanguy and Ndombele's money that was coming off the wage bill was paid off. So it wasn't quite as clear-cut a story as everyone would have it, would like to have had it made out to be. But in any event, we still do have a lot of wiggle room to go for it. And with the youth process, the transition to youth-centric model kind of hopefully towards its end now, we've got enough of them. Now it's time to go and find some sprinkling in of some serious talent to be able to cement what we've built in a hub of youth potential. We need that excellence. We need the people that are going to be guaranteed to get you goals, guaranteed to protect you. Players like Palhinha, players like Jonathan David, players like maybe the next name we're going to come back to in a second at Bayern Munich. Then that's where you have the opportunity now, because of what you've done, because of the wage to turnover ratio getting lower, because of that youth-centric model. There is room for these sorts of endeavours. And Daniel Levy, for sure, has had a really tough year of it with the fans. He's had a really tough year of it with the Change for Tottenham protest. People are going after him. But of late, he's made a couple of good decisions with regards the PR of the football club, what he's doing versus Sir Jim Ratcliffe with regards Manchester United's approach to the UEFA Cup final tickets. And Tottenham's is very different. And I think that there's a number of little kind of micro moments. Be big in small things is a phrase that I use quite a lot on this channel. It's something I learnt back in the day, and something that I think Daniel Levy is starting to pay attention to, because it's those little things that can actually make a difference in the eyes and the minds and the ears of the audience. And I think that those things are kind of irrelevant, but they do help. They do help win people over. Now, what would really help Daniel Levy win people over, obviously, would be the Europa League. If he lifts the Europa League, like I say, I don't subscribe to this notion that he's responsible for the successes and the failures on the pitch directly. I think indirectly, of course, he is a massive slice of that, but I don't share this notion that all of the failures on the pitch is at his feet because the buck stops at the top. People that do, as I say, I'm looking forward to finding out how you feel if we win on Wednesday. But for Daniel Levy to lift the cup, that will be massive for him. But on top of that, even if we don't, if there's a way, if there's a mechanism, if there's a means by which he can go out and attract a name like Jonathan David, break the wage structure once, and maybe do it again with a secondary name here, or the third name which we're going to come to, then I'm all aboard it. And I think a lot of the Tottenham fans will start to go, about time, but you can't criticise it. And it's about time to kind of think that maybe Tottenham have sort of started to change gear towards a club that acts like a organisation that is valued at 3.75 billion, and that starts and finishes, if I'm entirely honest, with the correct risk appetite. Anyway, so Jonathan David's story is not done. My voice just broke. Jonathan David's story is not done, apparently, according to Court Offside. We will find out how that one turns out in the next couple of days. I'd imagine that Wednesday will be the earliest we'll see anything, and at least for sure we will know whether or not there's any chance based on whether we are the Europa League Cup holders. The next story, guys, is Leroy Sane, or at least that's the name I've always been calling him, Leroy Sane. Do you fancy a bacon Sane? Watching some commentary about him today, and it's Leroy Sane. He is back on Tottenham's list. He's also on the list of Aston Villa again as another option. Why is it we're always competing with the same teams? Same teams for the same players. Newcastle, Villa, Chelsea. It's the same thing, isn't it? That second tier, just below the top tier. We don't compete with City and Liverpool for their players, their targets, but those other people that are in the kind of tier below, then we're after it. So Sane, he is back on. And remember, guys, he is a free transfer this year. He is available. 300 grand a week is what he's getting paid in euros at Bayern Munich. And again today, out there in the aggregators and being shared by some of the bigger names, some of the bigger kind of online content space. I haven't seen this one get into the Times yet. I think it was in the Mirror, actually. I do think it was in the Mirror. That Leroy Sane is part of Tottenham's potential wish list for a right-wing slot specialist. And I think the story was kind of saying, do Tottenham pivot from Matisse Tell to him, because there might be sort of more here now, ready now kind of substance and what we need on the right-hand side. We probably have enough talent on the left-hand side. Do we have what we need on the right-hand side? I would say we don't, although I do like Udogie. You can't argue Brennan Johnson's numbers. I'm not a massive fan of Brennan Johnson's input, as you know, but I'm not a hater. You can't hate his output. He takes advantage of the system which we built, but the system which we have built, I believe, is because we don't have the talent on the right-hand side. If we did, we would be able to do more of a multi-prong approach, but because we don't have that in Brennan Johnson, we are forced to go down the left-hand side, especially if we're trying to accommodate Sonny, which seems to be a little bit of the par for the course. And then as a consequence, Brennan Johnson has adapted. He is a beneficiary of the system and also the work rate of players like Dominic Solanke. But Leroy Sane is back on the list and apparently out there in the aggregates this morning that Tottenham is seriously considering it. And again, it comes down to these numbers thing. So the same argument that you could have made for Jonathan David, presuming that there is some truth to the idea that that story isn't dead and that he's not necessarily definitely going to Napoli. I'm taking the word of the journalist here. Then why can't you make the same argument for Leroy Sane? In fact, why can't you make the argument for both? Right? You've got Timo Werner that's leaving. He's on 180 grand a week. So there's kind of like 60% of the wage covered for, say, Jonathan David immediately in that replacement. And despite that 180 grand a week for him or whatever we're paying, that was just replacing the money from Ivan Perisic. And despite all of those things being a part of the wage structure, we still brought that revenue number down. Now, next year, we will have higher revenue, in my opinion, than this year's numbers, because this year's numbers were based on last year. Last year, we had the fewest games in the Premier League history at Tottenham and the fewest non-match day events. Hi, guys. And so this is a year later, where there's the revenue from this year that deepens the Europa League. Hopefully we win the Europa League Cup as well. And then from there, obviously, those numbers are going to go up. And if the wage number stays the same, just on a net, then obviously that wage ratio comes down even further. The pressure on Daniel Levy to go out there and increase the wage, to demonstrate some ambition, is palpable. And I think that 600 grand a week, I'm not making the argument that we should sign Leroy Sane, by the way. I don't hate him. I think he's really good. I watched some highlights of him again today. I thought this guy is clearly an extraordinarily talented player. And even in a somewhat off year for Bayern Munich, where he's surplus to requirements and he's wound his contract down because he wants to go on the free, maybe he took his foot off the gas, because the last thing you want if you're coming towards the end of your contract and you haven't signed a new one because you're hoping for a better one somewhere else, is an injury. And so maybe, just maybe, part of the reason why his numbers and his effort is a little bit kind of lacklustre in the last 6 months of his working time at Bayern Munich is because of that fear. But either way, he's an absolute beast of a player. You'd love to see it. He elevates the brand. He brings with it gravitas. It certainly isn't Harrods Tupperware when it comes to Sane. It's just a case of whether you think that there's value for money in the transfer. Now, he would also want something like, I guess, a £30 million signing fee between him and his agent, something similar to Jonathan David. And look, he's not at the point of his career where he's completely past it, for sure. But can Daniel Levy really find the valuation, the justification for a value for money transfer on someone that is at the tail end, the 29-year-olds? Remember, there is a massive trend right now that Daniel Levy was not the starter of. He wasn't the groundbreaker on. If anything, City and Chelsea were. But in the last 24 months, many teams, since Tottenham started to do it, have pivoted away from buying players for peak valuations over the age of 26 because there's just no sell-on fee, there's no valuation. But Tottenham have done enough of that. And for me, if you're trying to find the valuation justification for players that are 28, 29, then you do so by wondering and figuring out not directly what they can provide you in resale value, but how much money their contribution to the team can bring in merit points, in league positions, by getting the extra points. We made this argument for Palhinha the other day, I was talking with Sava, that he's 30 years old, 31 years old. He's obviously, if you're going to bring him in and you're going to pay whatever, 40 million quid for him, 30 million pound for him, and I would love to see it, by the way. I would absolutely love to see it. I'm going to come to finish that story in a second. But the way that you justify that valuation, if you're Daniel Levy, and I don't know if he's got any kind of historical precedence of doing it this way, but the way he should be doing it, if you're listening, Daniel, is figure out what 14 points or 10 points or however much that contribution of that position, those goals from the Sane, that defensive stability, that resolution, that willingness to sit and protect the back four, all of those things can provide you in points from games and leaderboard position, because we have sacrificed £30 million this year in merit points from finishing, the difference between finishing 5th and finishing 17th. So it is I don't know where your ball is. Where's your ball? Oh, there it is. It is a meaningful contribution that can be indirectly attributed to the value of certain players. And you can make the argument, how many points did Harry Kane bring to us? So it wasn't just his goals, but it's the points on the board. And so the sell-on value is one version of value, of sort of valuation metric, but also contribution to ways to getting hold of other money. does having a Leroy Sane instead of a Brennan Johnson, does having a Palhinha instead of a Bissouma, see Tottenham get back into, and does having a Jonathan David instead of a Richalison, see Tottenham get back to Champions League football? And if so, then compared to this year, let's presume that we don't finish in the Europa League winners and we don't get into the Champions League by the back door, then we will have sacrificed £30 million in merit points. Next year we would have that back, plus we would have the 60, 70 million pounds. So there's £100 million, or maybe even more, of valuation that could be attributed to the additional value of certain players being in the team that are not currently there. If that makes sense, let me know. If it doesn't, then tell me to shut up waffling. The last story, guys, is Palhinha, and it's about, it's a really kind of like an indirect story, but when I put the story out about Palhinha the other day, I had loads of people saying there's no way in hell Palhinha would come to Tottenham. Why would you even mention that? I scratched my head and thinking, why would you say that? Like, he's already been at Fulham, so why would he think that Tottenham are beneath him? But on top of that, there were stories out literally 2 weeks ago, which I just found and discovered this morning, that Palhinha was more interested in coming back to the Premier League at West Ham than he was staying in Bayern Munich to play second fiddle or going to Spain or Italy. And so if that is the case, and again, it's quotes from a source that I will try and put on the screen, because I don't appreciate being told that I'm making stuff up. Then I'll reference the sources. Let me know your thoughts. If he's willing to go to, if he wants to come back to the Premier League, he has a house in London, and West Ham is enough for him, then surely Tottenham is enough for him, right? And to me, guys, I just think with those three players, it doesn't have to be Sane, but if you were to get Jonathan David on a free, Palhinha for basically the Harry Kane money, so no real net transfer, and someone like a Leroy Sane who can come in, I prefer to say, I'm going to keep saying Sane because it's just, I like it, it's a nicer sound. Then to me, I just sit there and think, like, those three players have basically cost you nothing in terms of cash. There's ways that you can manipulate the buying, the finder's fee for the agent and the signing fees and all those sorts of things, where you can maybe kind of push numbers around on a piece of paper. You can ask for certain delays, structure it in a certain way that's good for the goose and good for the gander. And then you go and get someone else like an Angel Gomez if you want to. That's also another free transfer. You go and get a Vanderson, who for me is a massive value play here. £30 million for that guy. The more I look at him, the more I think he is an absolute beautiful player that would fit the Premier League like a glove. So if you could go and get those four players, guys, you immediately transform Tottenham. You plugged the gap that's been so obvious in Tottenham's system for the last 3 years since Conte. We haven't plugged. Palhinha is a fantastic player, Prem proven, a beast. He's unhappy in Germany, allegedly. He wants to come out. He wants to come back to the Premier League, allegedly. He was happy to go to West Ham, so therefore, if he's happy to go there, surely he'd rather come and play at Tottenham. And it makes sense. We have the relationship with Bayern Munich, so I don't know why we can't do that. And then, as I say, with the wage to turnover ratio what it is, and the fact that we're moving on Timo Werner, the fact that other players like, Ben Davies might be leaving the club as well, who have been around the block, and they're not exactly cheap on the wage, but they're not massive earners, but they're certainly up the top end of the list. It's not beyond the realms of reason to expect that Tottenham can sort of lift that kind of that ceiling finally on the salary cap that we seem to have put in place unnecessarily, and by doing so we can start to attract better players, and all of that becomes easier if Wednesday does turn out to be the way that we all hope it will, guys. That's about it. Let me know your thoughts. I'm sorry if it's still, I don't know how I managed to talk for 18 minutes about three stories, but it is what it is. I'll see you later on for a live stream with some guys, and then on Monday we're doing 7 p.m. I'm bringing on Barnaby Slater, our debut on the channel. We're going to be starting doing work together to do a preview of Wednesday. Then Tuesday I'm off. Look forward to doing some live streams out from Bilbao in the sunshine with some sangria. And I'll see you on the next one, guys. Like, subscribe and comment. And as always, bye-bye.